the reality is we are in a housing crisis. Everyone says this.
100%.
We have a situation where there are about 1.5 million people on housing waiting lists, social waiting lists across the country. We have 164 children who are living homeless. We do need the private rented sector to address this. The government cannot build those 1.5 million homes tomorrow. But we have a situation where some landlords are receiving in excess of over £20,000 per annum in terms of rent. A number of landlords have multiple properties. That's their prerogative. But when it comes to the issues of the state of their properties, those same very landlords do not want to engage with the system. We have a situation where in some properties, damp, mould, mice infestation. For love of money, you cannot contact that landlord, but yet they are receiving public taxpayers' money for keeping the state of that property, unkept. What more could you as an organisation be doing to inform your landlords about their legal obligations and upholding their part of the contract at the same time whilst they're receiving government and taxpayers' money for that property?
So we have no issue with increased standards, and actually what I would say to you is that despite not having a decent homes standard, 4 out of 5 properties in the private rented sector already meet that standard. So I'm not worried about bringing the rest of them up to scratch. But of course, what we have to look at things is in the round, and landlords and investors are between a rock and a hard place at the moment. There are barriers to coming into the market. I totally agree with you, by the way, in as much as we have a housing crisis. Actually, we have a social housing crisis, and the government are doing their level best to deal with that. But as I said at the outset, that's not going to deal with the here and now. So we do need the private rented sector to step up. And the way that you get the private rented sector to step up is not to impose huge amounts of regulation on it. The private rented sector will thrive if it is allowed to, but at the moment we have significant barriers to entry in terms of stamp duty. That's not going to encourage people to come into the sector. We have things like the ground that I set out. That's just one thing of many. How can it be right that as a landlord, if I'm accepting a UC tenant, because I certainly don't want to discriminate, I have tenants on UC, how is it right that I don't know about that and that I can't get possession of my property back because of the fault of somebody else? So I think there's stuff that government can do that's just a bit more pragmatic to say, hey guys, we actually kind of need you to stay in the sector. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's all about tax giveaways and the like, but it is about a fair and reasonable package.
I wondered if you'd like to comment on the cumulative impact on benefit claimants of the freezing of local housing allowance rates for several years when rents have actually been rising. What's been the impact on the tenants who are reliant on housing benefit and UC health element as well, housing element as well? Who'd like to kick off?
Yeah, so I think it's having a very damaging effect. We know that obviously rents are rising. Rents have risen 7.4% in the last 12 months to April. And the fact that obviously LHA rates are frozen. I know there was a concession last year, but we need to really make a political choice over the amount of people that are really, really struggling at the margins. And I want to kind of address the rent increases, because I wouldn't want you to form the impression that this is landlords jacking up rents where they can. My members are struggling with their costs as well, whether that's inflation, whether that's mortgage interest and not being able to offset that against your tax returns, whether that's the cost of regulation, selective licensing, possible minimum energy efficiency standards. All of that is having a huge impact on sentiment in the sector. We have a dozen tenants chasing every available home, and it's that real lack of supply that is driving those rents up. But I mentioned a political decision. If we did have a commitment to setting LHA at the 30th percentile and unfreezing it for the remainder of this Parliament, it would actually lift 75,000 children out of poverty by 2029, 2030 at a cost of £1.8 billion. If you were feeling very generous and raised it to the 50th percentile, then that would lift 130,000 children out of poverty by 2030, a cost of £3.1 billion. This is all achievable. It just requires deep pockets and a political will to do it.
The Renters' Rights Bill will come into force later this year. It's going to have a big impact, obviously, on relationships between benefits claimants and landlords. Just interested to know what you think the impacts might be, the pros and cons. Perhaps we start off with the landlord's view, Ben?
I suspect we don't have enough time to cover all of our views on this matter. No, look, the Renters' Rights Bill is coming, and we're working collaboratively to make sure that it works for responsible landlords and renters alike. You know, we recognise the sector needs to change. We do have some concerns. We have some concerns around the ability of the courts and tribunal service and the court system to be able to manage the transition, and we think there are some steps that could be taken to alleviate that. I should first and foremost start by saying we want to keep people in their homes. We have a housing crisis. We welcome the commitment in the spending review to more affordable and social accommodation over the next Parliament, but the need is now, and I say that because I said earlier we've got 12 people chasing every available home, but we also have a massive crisis of confidence in the private rented sector, and actually a jam tomorrow policy, whilst welcome, doesn't deal with some of the really pressing issues before us at the moment. This sort of churn within the private rented sector, the fear that investors have around staying in the sector, even coming in to the sector at a time we most need them. And that's why we say that I think court reform concessions in relation to the student market are going to be very important. But if I dial it back to local housing allowance specifically, we are very concerned about the ground 8 ground for possession for serious rent arrears, because the bill will prevent landlords from using the mandatory arrears ground if arrears are linked to a delayed universal credit payment. Now, at a time we want to encourage landlords to accept all types of tenants that are presented before them, that's a real turn-off. Particularly when you would wait upwards of 12 months to get possession of your property back. And if you also look at some of the difficulties around the universal credit system, landlords aren't treated the same way as social providers. You can't ring up your local housing officer like you once could before and have a sensible conversation. This is about sustaining tenancies, right? We want to keep people in their homes. We don't want to jack up the rents, but actually to give landlords confidence about the UC system, this particular ground is a nonsense, because it encourages actually landlords to say, well, do you know what? I'm going to steer clear. Because I simply, not only can I not get possession of my property back, I'm also in significant rent arrears. That's what that ground is for. And so I think private landlords do need to know whether a tenant is in receipt of universal credit, and they may only discover that rent arrears were due to a delayed UC payment at the time of a possession hearing. Now that's going to have a huge knock-on effect on the court service. Actually, you need this information up front. You don't want to get before a judge when you've waited best part of 6 or 7 months only to find out that a tenant was on UC and you're not eligible to use that ground. So we don't think that landlords should be penalised for benefit systems delay over which they have no control, and the bill must be amended to remove the universal credit delay caveat.
Can I ask, what are your views on the government's announcement to increase spending on building affordable and social housing in the spending review, and how far do you think that announcement will address challenges faced by claimants in the private and social rented sector?
Very briefly, we absolutely welcome the commitment to affordable and social housing 100%. As I keep banging on about, the need is now, and just to go back to Florence's point, you know, actually, if the state are paying for substandard, crappy accommodation, well, they shouldn't. It really is as simple as that. And so what I would say is give those good, responsible providers a break, make renters' rights work for them, make minimum energy efficiency standards work for them. But those people at the margins that are exploiting others and providing rubbish accommodation, absolutely throw the book at them.